First of all, before starting, I really have to express how happy I am with the fact that we're having yet another one successful Kubeflow Summit. It's really moving to see so many familiar faces around throughout those years. I'm really sad that I couldn't join you in person to meet all of you and also celebrate and have fun and engage with all of the community, the great community that we have. But I really had to say that I'm really happy that we're having this summit again. So, but I'll keep the thank yous at the end of the presentations as well. So I'll be talking for both manifest working groups and notebooks working group. This the structure is mostly going to be where are what has changed in my mind also compared to the previous summit we had last year. What are we working on right now, and what are the pain points and things that we think are missing, and we would like feedback from users and to organize efforts. And last but not least, open efforts regarding processes that we're thinking around those working groups. So I'm giving the same template from last year, and I always like to start with what exactly does Manifest Working Group maintain to make sure it's clear to everyone in the meeting what is the goal and the responsibilities, and where currently at least we're keeping the focus on the Manifest Working Group. So the components that we actually maintain are components that are developed under the Kubeflow GitHub organization. This means that we want the Manifest Working Group to be a place where people can find the manifest files to deploy any component that is actively maintained under the Kubeflow GitHub organization, whether it's Kubeflow for the notebooks working group, Kubeflow pipelines, excellent work from Kubeflow CAD and training operators that we saw, and even new efforts as we'll most probably talk in the future about Spark, for example. So the goal is, first of all, to be able to provide first access to those components so that people can actually go and deploy them. Then we do maintain a couple of, as we call them, it's dependency components or also common components, which are things like components that we need to serve the whole list, or at least the core ecosystem of Kubeflow. So we do need Istio, since currently it's our service mesh, and the way that we do both our proxying in the service mesh as well as namespace and service mesh isolation amongst the services. We do have Cert Manager, which is used for webhooks across the different projects, whether it's the webhooks for pod defaults, Ktip, Kserve, you name it. And we have Knative, and as well as other common roles that are used to tie Kubeflow together, like aggregating the roles so that user namespace can have good permissions to apply anything they need, as well as components for authentication and authorization, like auth service and OAuth to proxy and DEX, so that the goal is that within this repo, people can have an installation that will get them started with the whole platform that they can fully utilize. Of course, there are some asterisks always over there, but we'll talk about them in the future in the next slides. And Manifest Working Group, we're pretty happy to also maintain a list of add-on components or contrib components, which are components that are hugely developed and maintained by contributors outside of the Kubeflow GitHub organization, in the sense that their code does not live inside of the Kubeflow repository, but there is huge value, and their maintainers are kind enough to want to integrate them with Kubeflow. So after some discussion also and some structure from our side, we have agreed on what is the thin line of expectations from Kubeflow, in order to have add-on components so that users can come and feel that Kubeflow indeed is an ecosystem where they can find different tools that they can mix and match. So example of those are Ray and BentoML, which are recent additions that we had also this year, which I'm going to talk about in the future, again, in the next slide. So with this, what's new compared to the previous summit that we had? I'm pretty excited to say quite a lot, and throughout the presentation, I really want to emphasize how it's really moving, and all of this is great work from our contributors. So I really want to thank everyone that spent the time and joins the meetings and always try to explain what they want and what they think and how to move the project forward. So with this, here's what we have. First of all is network policies, which is spearheaded by Julius, as we also saw in the previous presentation regarding security. So network policies is an extra layer of security on top of Istio, where there while Istio is the service mesh which we configure to say which components should be able to talk to which other service with what headers and when to allow our block requests. Network policies is the Kubernetes concept of actually going one level below this and being able to isolate pods in namespaces from one another. So it's Kubernetes native. And the question that is a very hot topic, and we are having discussions, and I want to also I put it here because the more feedback we get, the better we can have a decision on this, is whether should components like network policies be considered an add-on, which means something optional, or should it be part of the core projects in manifest? And the consideration for those are, because in order to enable components like network policies, we do need to update files that affect the components of the different working groups. The question here is about who is going to maintain and when is the line of responsibility. I'm not going to take any side at this point. My goal is to just raise that in this discussion, the concept is that should the manifest working group start being the place that we can also keep having extra features on top of the rest of the Kubeflow system, like for example, the network policies that will be expected to be configured per component, but the logic to live in the manifest? Or should we try to push this also downstream to its working group to be able to help and maintain it? And of course, for whatever the decision is, all of the working groups will need to be in sync on decisions like this. And you please, if you have an opinion or you'd like to raise yours, we have this tracking issue where we're talking about promoting network policies to either become part of the core project or keep being an add-on. And I've also included some links that you can use later on where it is inside of the code, as well as what network policies are. So next up, an exciting effort we have is OAuth2 proxy, and this is spearheaded by Alex Stefanini. And it's really one of the great efforts where initially one of the main goals that we want is to fully replace our auth service. Auth service, for those that don't know, is the component that Istio will use to make sure that it's actually our OIDC client that will check, is a request authenticated? Is there a session cookie? Let me check my database, and if not, let me initiate a login workflow depending on the OIDC provider that we have. But we want to move away from auth service, so this is one of the major reasons why this is really significant contributions. But I'm going to talk about the auth service in a later slide. I didn't say it down in the future, so keep that in the back of your mind for now. And as I mentioned, OAuth2 proxy is going to be handle a good amount of our OIDC client logic, like keeping track of the open sessions, the users that are logged in. When we want to log out, we need to revoke our tokens from OIDC provider. And the great thing with OAuth2 proxy is the fact that it really has a very, very big community behind it to support it. So it really is a very good and compelling argument to go towards this component that could potentially even have more support for different identity providers. Again, I'm going to provide a couple of links for the curious ones on both where it is right now on our common code base, as well as the links to the project itself. Next up, we have an effort that you've heard in the previous slide from Julius, and it's a really good topic to also bring up, which is we have rootless Istio, and this is a great effort that was spearheaded by both Julius and Svetomir, and it's one of those efforts that actually has a bigger goal, which we'll talk also down the road, which is to go more full on rootless Kubeflow. So for rootless Istio, one of the main reasons that we also want to include it is because out of the box, Istio will not work with, will require root permissions. So in order to be able to work with pod security standards, we will need to be able to have Istio CNI and later on move towards other implementation of Istio like ambient mesh that are evolutions of this same practice. But the reason that we really like this effort is again because of being able to run all of our workloads as rootless. I'm also linking a couple of PRs in case that you want to follow the history of this effort. And last but not least, on what we actually have right now is I'm pretty happy to say the two new add-ons. One is Ray, in which Julius did a very good job on coordinating with some of the authors of Ray actually to have them align with what are our expectations for the Kubeflow side and how it would integrate and security concerns and try to push to get those two projects aligned, which is always very it really warms my heart when we see communities like that interact and try to create a better ecosystem. So the outcome of this is that we right now have we can via the add-ons integrate with KubeRay, the KubeRay operator that can handle Ray cluster CRs, which we all of them we can access from Jupyter notebooks to handle different jobs on those Ray clusters. Now I won't go too much into the technical details, but you can find the code again under contrib Ray. And also one of the tracking issues that we had for this effort if you want to follow the history. And last but not least, we also have integration with BentoML, which was spearheaded by Shan Sheng and the whole BentoML team, which I have to say that we're very, very happy that they became part of our of the Kubeflow community, and they are also actively helping with the release team and being workgroup liaisons and help us bridge our relationship also with Kaiser alongside the release. So we really want to I personally really want to thank them for this. And BentML is a great way for us to package models and give another alternative for people to try out in their installations, as well as deploy models at scale. And of course, you can find the contrib code under BentML. So these were the big ones that right now we have already merged in, and most probably will be in all of them will be part of 1.8 unless something really huge happens, but we don't think so. So with this, let me also talk about the exciting work we're actually cooking right now and is being prepared. So first one is, as you also saw in another great presentation, we're investing into OAuth 2 proxy now that this merged and how to better integrate it alongside the Istio service mesh. This is spearheaded by Christopher Romanowski. So, and we're really happy that he actually joined and helped us also start the discussions around natively integrating our OIDC logic with Istio and provided a ton of valuable context on what are some best practices, why Istio is moving away from the envoy filters, and what is the best approach that we can have in the future. So this is really something that I'm looking forward to see the more and more integration we do with the OAuth 2 proxy and community. Again, I'm going to link an issue that shows this effort and we'll go more into the technical details of what it means. I don't want to get too technical at this point. And next up is yet another great contribution from Christoph, which is being able to have programmatic clients with OAuth 2 proxy. And this actually goes towards the discussion of bridging the gaps between our current auth service, which right now, although with some very, not hacky, but complicated logic, like exposing parts of the API, Kubernetes API server for getting tokens. Right now, while we do have this programmatic access, this is something that we really, really want to ensure we will have in order to fully make the transition. So as I've said, the great thing about this effort is for us to be able to have a well-defined and documented way and best practices for integrating our OIDC client and have programmatic client tokens, and which will give support from users to be able to trigger and access workloads of a Kubeflow cluster from outside of a notebook, from outside of the cluster, but without triggering the whole OIDC flow where users will need to go into Dex, find the cookie, put that in a request, and send them the request. Again, you can find the issue about this. It's a pretty nice and detailed issue on how to do some nice OIDC with Kubernetes server and enable communication between OAuth 2 proxies. So it's really interesting for everyone to read, I would say. And next up, one of the most exciting efforts as well is, as I mentioned, Julius's ongoing effort to keep and drive and make Kubeflow more secure, but now across the whole project. So This effort for rootless Kubeflow is, while it's initially aimed for doing it on the Kubeflow namespace, which means that all of the containers in the Kubeflow namespace will not require insecure permissions or run as root. It can actually then be extended, although with some design efforts that we're also discussing on across user namespaces, and this might require even some additional logic on how can we make sure that user namespaces are annotated in a way that express, I want to make sure that those changes are applied to me. And for this effort, we have both a tracking issue and the proposal that we have merged regarding this direction and more details on what are the steps that we would do it, the timelines, and the potential considerations that we have. With this, I would like to also briefly touch upon a little bit of the forward-looking concepts and specifically the areas that we consider are weak right now in Kubeflow manifests, and also from the feedback that we've gotten are things that areas that we would really also love to start more discussions and get more user feedback on. And the two things that I have in mind is it's on one hand is moving more towards making the installation smooth in terms of customized 5 warnings. This is some work that we need to make across the different working groups to make sure that all of our components are fully migrated to customized 5. And we've had a very interesting issue that we had some feedback from users in manifest that expressed that they feel that trying to provide a simple one customization that includes essentially a kitchen sink approach where we have both DEX, OIDC, cert manager might not fit all needs. While my personal opinion on this is that the fact that we have customized components tries to exactly tackle this problem and allows the users to be able to pick the components that they need. So if they don't need one tool, they can simply not install cert manager. Yet I fully understand the complaint and the warning that right now this complexity is actually hidden on top of piles of manifests. So the very minimum thing that we can do from our side in the community is to at least ensure that we can document and provide good documentation to users on exactly what are those moving pieces and what are the dependencies for someone to even configure with the customized components. But it also goes hand in hand with requests that we've seen that if you're going to go down the road with this complexity, then why not use something like help? And last but not least, something that has been occurring a lot, and we even had a deployment working group for this problem, which from what I understand, is not actively maintained anymore. But there's still the problem that touched a little bit on the previous point of, okay, we do have the manifest and a point of truth. For example, if we want to do GitOps, but what are the operations that now we can do on top? Whether this is define what components we want and how to apply them, all the way to how to then have upgrades on top of those components. So those are some weak areas that we're actively and always want to improve. So the more opinions we can hear and discuss, that's going to be the better. And with this, let me also touch a little bit upon processes that have changed on the last year. One is, as I discussed, is we're moving away from the auth service, and the main reason for that is that the Upstream project is no longer actively maintained, or at least all of the maintainers that initially were there are now will not be active. So the current situation here is that right now we have mirrored the images even from their registries into a Docker Hub registry maintained by the Manifest Working Group as an intermediate solution to ensure that people won't suddenly everyone see their clusters failing before a registry got down. But we really are actively working on replacing it with OAuth 2 proxy, which the blocker there is, as I mentioned, getting programmatic clients. And we plan to completely move away to Kubeflow 1.9. And for now, we provide both options for people to try out, but we highly encourage people to actually integrate with OAuth 2 proxy. And next up, this is something that I'm pretty excited. The fact that unless we did this effort to actually update our charter with more requirements and making it clear for people to get more decision-making power, it would be useless for me to be giving credits to people in the community. So I'm very happy that in this last year we have actually worked on clearly defining what are the requirements for people to be able to become reviewers, or at least cleaned up from the Manifest Working Group. Expectations to become reviewer, approver, or even becoming a lead. And with this, at least for for Manifest, I really want to say thank you to Anna Jung and Julius for being along us for at least for a very long time. Anna, especially since she was also a release manager and she's been with us and helped throughout the years. I'm really grateful for all the time she has spent and all the work we've done together. And Julius as well, who is one of the most active members right now and always helps to keep the community engaged and always try to get more and more people engaged. And the other people in the presentation did as well. I'm pretty happy that they did. We really need to say thank you to Amber and Josh. I think sometimes we don't give you guys credit enough because Josh has been here, for those that don't know, from 2018, so it's 5 years on the project, and Amber has really helped us straight up get Kubeflow in a good place in which we also have processes. We're moving to CNCF and we have the summit. So thank you all for your contributions throughout the years. And that's the Manifest one. I have another one presentation, but I'll wait in case of questions.
Thank you, Kimonas. Any questions right quick before we move to Dan and Kaser?
Oh wait, I have notebooks.
Oh, I forgot. You do more than one thing. I'm teasing. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so that's my next presentation. But I'll take it as.
Want me to get you off the screen.
Hmm?
I said you can't make my face turn red and then expect me to keep you on the screen.
Okay, but I'll take the hint for Danson that I need to speak a little bit faster, so I'll try to make this one quicker. So Notebooks Working Group and beyond. So again, the same format. What do we maintain in Notebooks Working Group? Now, this is quite of an interesting one because Notebooks Working Group traditionally kind of feels like it's when we moved Kubeflow to 1.0 and all of the components were in a different repos. It's the components that were considered core enough, but we didn't have a good enough story at that point to say how to break them out of Kubeflow. So this is how we end up having those components in Kubeflow, which does create some problems with organization and process, which I'll talk in the process section. But the high-level overview that I need you to have is that the main components we maintain are web apps, the central dashboard, the notebooks, web app, Unicube notebooks, volumes, and TensorBoards. We do maintain a couple of controllers that we have, like the node controller for creating notebooks, profiles for user management, the access management controller dash server for making sure we do permission checks and across the namespaces. We have our pod defaults webhook and a recently newly added PVC viewers controller, plus TensorBoards. And we do also maintain a list of example notebook servers that people can use to get an out-of-the-box experience when installing Kubeflow. So as you can see, we are a little bit all over the place and that's a little bit of different areas. So keep this in mind for our processes section. So what's new from the last year? While we did have a ton of nice and small fixes and security improvements, I'll try to keep the most important changes that we had last year in terms of kind of new features. And we had some good changes in the web apps alongside the last year with efforts spearheaded by Orpheus and Elena. And those are make sure that all of our pages now have dedicated details pages for all of our objects like notebooks, volumes, or TensorBoards, where you can go and click and see the details for each one of those instances. And we provide actually rich Kubernetes information and status on those pages with things like Kubernetes logs, Kubernetes events, or even YAML, so that we try to bridge the gap of not requiring users to use kubectl to figure out what is going on in the Kubeflow cluster. And we had some also good additions like sorting on main pages, but there's also room to improve there on our performance, but those are some notable changes. Next up, a great contribution that we had was PVC viewers, which was spearheaded by Tobias and Apostolis, and I also helped a little bit on the design, in which we now have a new component that can allow users to manipulate the contents of PVCs. So you no longer will need to spin up a notebook and attach it to a PVC to view what is inside of the file system. From now on, from the volumes UI, you'll be able to spin up a component and see a file browser for your actual data. and this is integrated with the Volumes web app. You can see this great component under Components, PVC Viewer Controller. And last but not least, we also had the last year a great amount of effort for PVC64 LE support. And this was spearheaded by Sebastian and his team. And it really is great to always see Kubeflow getting adopted in more and more platforms. And this holds for at least the components in Kubeflow, but for other working groups as well. And with this, here's some of the exciting work that we're actively working right now. And one of this is our effort to, even from 1.7, we were debating on going to a different direction and doing a rename, since right now notebooks refers to both Jupyter notebooks, VS Code, and RStudio for the time being. So the name notebook was a little bit confusing. So we thought of the name Workbench, but in the end we're leaning on the name of Workspaces. And this is something that is spearheaded by Matthew. And it's a really great and powerful way that we can have template pod configurations for defining different types of server. So we can have templates for Jupyter, VS Code, etc. And this can be then a great way for people to configure, have a lot of different templates on what they do. There is some discussion on how to have the UX around if someone would like, for example, to potentially use a pod default, or we should go full in with workspaces. But in any case, this is one of the great efforts that will require a lot of work, because we'll need a web app, controllers, and documentation around that. So if you would also like to contribute, this is a great area that you can get in. Next up, we had an effort in the last year from Alex Stefanini, who worked on OAuth2 proxy, and he really spearheaded the effort of actually starting and discussing about groups, and not just having single end users, but how to extend Kubeflow and all of the components to be able to have groups, which are defined also in OIDC, on our OIDC systems, but reflect also to Kubernetes group permissions. Now, this will really need to make us to rethink also our profile story, and how do we expect to have a multi-tenant story and all of this, which, again, the goal of all of this is to keep on having this discussion until we find a story that we like. So again, I'm mentioning the issue that for if someone would like to be up to speed. And then we have our effort to include ARM support, because we all know how much ARM is needed, and you realize it once you switch to Mac, where you say, oh no, how do I actually spin up Kubeflow? So we're actually pushing in 1.8 to have all of the components in 1.8 as well to support ARM, aside from the example notebook servers, which we didn't have the cycles in this release, but it's something that we can expect users that will be able to find notebooks from other places. So at least it is a step forward. And with this, let me touch a little bit upon on the forward-looking topics that we're considering and we feel that we're missing and would like to get some more feedback and discuss with the community. One is automation on top. Now, we had a really great presentation from Omri and Roadblocks on how they use Kubeflow. And it really always, for me, it's a great opportunity to see that when people need to create huge systems on top of what we provide, this is really something for us to look and reflect on things that it means that we're missing something from the Kubeflow side. And automation on user handling is one of the main areas, if we're going to be having profile objects, in my mind, that we need to also keep discussing. So another thing that also comes hand to hand is, how can I make sure that I'm keeping in sync Kubernetes profiles and my OIDC and essentially where my users are defined? We saw systems like having a complete workflow for having GitHub as a source of truth and then applying profiles. The more we can have discussions like this and what can be our recommended way of going forward, the better it will help the project. Even because in my mind, this is what the Kubeflow initially aimed to be, not try to deploy new components that much, but find best of breed other tools and combine them to tackle problems that we already have. And whether this is at least a documentation and saying, this is our best practice for MLOps on Kubernetes, that is good enough for me. And with this, let's also touch lastly about processes. And one of them is we're actively working and want to move over to GCR.io, GitHub's container registry. Main reason is that we're getting Docker Hub rate limiting right now with with Kubeflow, and especially if people would like to use it, this can be frustrating. but it can also has a nice feature of having a of utilizing a build cache, which we can use for multi-architectures, since those take a lot, because right now those are being emulated in the virtual machines. And that, of course, doesn't mean that we have to stop pushing on Docker Hub, but at least switching over to GitHub Container Registry as a default. And we're also having some discussions about notebook servers, mainly because those require a good amount of maintenance and is also a good source of CVEs. There are no decisions taken at this point, but are, where should the focus of those notebook servers be? Oops. Is it going to be just focusing, providing the thin information of how can I integrate my server, Jupyter, VS Code, etc. with Kubeflow? Or should we aim to provide a plethora of different configurations that are kind of kitchen sink and try to include different frameworks for different needs alongside Kubeflow? And if we do, maybe do we need a dedicated repo to be able to host those images or allow users to include their own? And then what is going to be our SLA regarding those images? And last but not least, this is a controversial one, but as I mentioned, is moving away from the Kubeflow repo. And the rationale for this is, as I mentioned in the beginning, mostly to be able to allow us to have a better versioning of the components, as right now, everything that is in Kubeflow repo, by its nature, also follows the release versioning of the Kubeflow project. So this actually can block us if we find, for example, that there is a small new fix that we would like to include, but shouldn't justify a whole Kubeflow release. These kinds of blocks us right now, and we need to include such efforts in subsequent releases. So moving away from Kubeflow and breaking things into their own repos is something that can help us. Plus, it can give us more fine-grained control over those repos instead of having a huge monolith that maybe we should reconsider of having code there after all. And with this, yet once again, thank you both to Matthew, first of all, for being with us for a lot of years. I think it was from 2020, so it's at least been 3 years. So it's really great for all the work that we've been doing the last 3 years. And again, for Julius, for constantly trying to keep users maintained and also having an architectural overview and trying to improve the project. And I won't get bored of saying it, but thank you both, Amber and Josh, for investing your personal time to let all of this happen and us to have this great time. And I'm really, really looking forward to having it next year. That's me.